The Thumbprint Project Foundation proudly presents the docuseries Childhood Domestic Violence, The Hidden Public Crisis. Joining us is Kristie Bruce Lane. She's the founder and president, started the foundation in 2019.
Thank you for having me, Drew.
Absolutely. And joining us is her colleague, is Stacey. She is the secretary of the foundation, joined a whole whopping 2 months ago. Christine, happy to have you on board.
Thank you so much for having us.
Of course. Kristie, why did you start the foundation?
So I've always been involved in children's lives, whether that's been through mentoring processes or creating scholarships for them to get to college. But what really solidified, my sort of idea and to bring this to life was when I had my son on October 19th, 2014. And, at that time, nothing makes a mother more vulnerable than having her heart outside of her chest, which that's what I call my son, out in this world. And you really start to look at life differently. And you realize that you're vulnerable to many different things, including domestic violence. And you start to wonder, what would I do if this happened? You start, creating and painting these scenarios in your mind. And it is something that's prevalent in San Diego as well as nationally and in the world. And so I really wanted to do this to protect the children.
Right. And, Christine, you went and joined the organization not too long ago. You've been familiar with the foundation for quite a while now. But what was the stimulus that got you involved?
I myself am a single mom, and being a mother in general is difficult as it is. Being a single mother is even more difficult. And then, you throw something like domestic violence into it, and it's just unimaginable. And I'm blessed enough to have support of family and friends. And a lot of the times these women don't have support from anyone, and they have to flee a situation, and they have no money. They have nowhere to go. They're literally packed up everything and just sit in a parking lot thinking, what do I do next? Where do I go? Not knowing that there are people waiting to help them, who want to help them, just waiting. And so that's why it really drew me, because I myself, like I said, I have a son, and I just couldn't even imagine life having to flee and have nowhere to go. So
yeah, and that's so true. So those people that didn't necessarily grow up in that environment, it's hard to get their hands around that there are people out there that have never been told, I love you, have never been hugged, have never gone to the beach, even though they live in San Diego and so forth. So, Kristie, talk about some of the stats.
Yeah, so the statistics are quite alarming. We'll go back to 2018, where there were, here in San Diego alone, over 17,500 reports of domestic violence. And what's more alarming is 37% of those cases involved children. Then you look at 2019, and there was a little over 17,400, a drop of about 1%. But anytime you look at statistics, you're always going to see them hover in that range. So now, as we all know, we're operating in the time of COVID. And 2020 has presented us a set of data that left some of us scratching our heads. And so what you see is with the San Diego Police Department, they saw a drop in 12% of the calls. And then the San Diego Sheriff's Department saw a drop of 30% in calls. And it really makes you sit back and look what's going on. Okay. And that there's women suffering out there. There's children out there who have that undercurrent in their homes of domestic violence. And this is, something that we need to raise awareness about to help prevent it.
Right. And it's something that is not an easy thing to talk about, obviously, especially if you're in the middle of it. But before we go back to Christine, as a single mom, which has different, viewpoints than if you were married and all that business. But I really want to get into the scope of that. What do people do if they think there's some domestic violence in their friend's house or in their cousin's house or someone? There's got to be plenty of hotlines they can call, correct?
Yeah, there is. There's always the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Certainly there's numbers that they can call. They can call the police or sheriffs. But, so many times people are private about it. And it's allowed to happen because it does stay behind closed doors. And so you either find people that are afraid to get involved. They don't want to get involved, and they look at it as a family matter. But really what this is, it's not a family matter. It affects our community, and it certainly affects our economy.
Yeah, without question. So, Christine, you're a single mom, okay, with a 6-year-old, right? And I hear your 6-year-old is pretty active, correct? Like most 6-year-olds are.
Most little boys, yeah.
Right, exactly. Talk about the challenges of being in this world and dealing with these things as a single mom.
First of all, it's a 24/7 job being a single mom. Being a mom in general, it's a full-time job. But as I said, a single mom, you have no one to tap in for you. So everything falls on your shoulders, all of the obligations. I mean, time, you think, how am I going to do all of this while, especially during COVID? You're the homeschool teacher, you're the mother, you're the father, you're the t-ball coach, you're whatever you have to be, and you have to take on so many roles while trying to maintain your own, ability to maintain life as just a woman in general. So it becomes very challenging, and then these women on top of it who have to struggle with fleeing and everything that they have to deal with, it's incredibly difficult for them to even fathom their steps and moving forward. So
Right. So, being a single mom, are you reaching out more to, whether it's your siblings or your parents or the people in the neighborhood? Because you're right. You're turning around and you go, and I need some, well, wait, it's me in the mirror that's working with,
Right.
how do you deal with that?
I'm fortunate enough to have family that is local, that can step in, friends that are local, even Kristie herself. I'm blessed to have her as a neighbor and a friend who, if something happens and I need to leave for whatever it may be, and I need childcare because it's just me, I'm able to have her step in and help with that, or family member. So these women who don't have that, it's just, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, and Christine brings up a good point. I want to piggyback on that is, part of the reason, we see the stats fall in 2020, especially if you measure it from the first quarter in 2020 and then when COVID hit. And what we have seen is the stats drop as far as domestic violence calls, but what you see if you look in the details is actual calls to resource centers and family justice centers are increasing. So there's women out there, and COVID is almost, you can it's almost like a shadow pandemic in itself when it comes to domestic violence. They're afraid to actually leave at that point because where are they going to go? The shelters are full. Maybe they're better off staying at home, but literally they're still trapped in their homes. Their perpetrator are watching them. Are you picking up the phone? Who are you calling? So it makes sense that the calls have decreased. Although if you look at national statistics, you see increases in double digits across Boston, San Francisco, LA, Indianapolis. You see it exploding everywhere. So we know it's happening. And a big part of my foundation is, creating that awareness. There are resources out there. Reach out. We're there to help. And we want to provide that for them, be a resource for them, and help guide them to the correct resources.
Right. And what's the website?
www.the Project Foundation.
Right. We're chatting with Kristie Bruce Lane. She is the founder and president of the Thumbprint Project Foundation, joined by Secretary Christina, Stacey, a single mom, on this aspect of it. Kristie was talking about, of course, with COVID, everybody's home right now, right? So it exasperates a situation that may have not been good beforehand in that area of it. So in your world here, we talked about a little bit earlier, is that do you have a whole laundry list of, okay, if X happens, I'm going to Y. If Z happens, I'm going to this. Because you've got to be so well organized being a single mom in this world.
You try to be well organized, but like COVID happened unexpectedly, you just have to kind of go on the fly. Things change on a daily, hourly basis, and especially when children are involved, you never know what the day holds. You can have a whole plan, but it'll change like that. So you just have to kind of have the mentality that this is life. This is what we're going to do. We're going to find a way to make it work, and we're going to stick together in doing so and find joy in what we can and just go through it.
So what advice do you give for those, whether the moms are single or whether they're married, whatever the case may be? If, listen, this is, they were experiencing this, what steps do they need to take? I mean, and these are courageous people. It's not easy to take a step like this, especially as Kristie was saying, that perpetrator is not at work because the person is at home because of COVID.
Right.
So what do you do?
So a lot of the times, and how I've always seen it, is domestic violence has no boundaries. It's in all social classes. It's in all, backgrounds, ethnicities. It doesn't matter. And have a lot of friends actually who you would never expect, because you look at them and they look picture perfect. Their life is picture perfect. Social media, the perfect family. Behind closed doors, you find out that it is a completely different scenario, and they don't leave. And oftentimes it's because the husband has all the finances and they're in charge of it. So the women don't know what to do. They're accustomed to their life that they have, and it's easier to just stay and keep going where they know it's comfortable as opposed to just leaving.
You bring up a very, very good point. Christy, you and I have chatted about this before. Because when you think of domestic violence, you're thinking about the physical violence, which of course is certainly horrible for 87 different reasons. Right. But it's more than physical. They control the pocketbook, as you were saying, Christine. And there's other things that are not physical. Talk about that.
That's right. So there's the physical, there's the financial, there's the emotional, psychological. It all plays into the part of domestic violence. And, I get the question, well, how do you know if you're just having a fight versus you're really in a domestic violence situation? And the telltale line of demarcation is the coercive tactics that are used of control, is that gaslighting, the person, trying to make them believe that there's something that they're not. So it's those sort of tactics, it's control measures. And that is the difference between just a fight and then knowing you're in an unhealthy relationship. So, I want to go back and tag on to Christine about how prevalent it is just nationally. According to statistics, the United Nations reports 243 million women are exposed to domestic violence. In fact, 1 in 3 women will experience a domestic violence situation in their lifetime. So, and according to the courts, children witness domestic violence cases in 22% of the cases that are presented to the courts. So that will give you just an overall view that this is a major problem, and it needs to have more light shined on the awareness of it. And more importantly is, this is a societal issue, right? And it starts at home, and that's where you can fix it. And people from the outside can provide you resources, but if you provide the awareness and the understanding of what you're doing to a child, and not being a model parent, everything you do and everything you say, that kid is absorbing. They are not passive bystanders in this situation.
Yeah, without question. You are listening to the Thumbprint Project Foundation's docuseries, Childhood Domestic Violence, the Hidden Public Crisis. We are chatting with Kristie Bruce Lane. She is the founder and president of the foundation, joined by her secretary, Christine Stacey. So we've already talked about 24 hours in a day, and you're about busy 23 hours and 59 minutes, right? You may have a minute in this aspect. How do you keep your son, in your case, your son, busy and try to normalize a very different normal?
I always say the park is the best place to take a child because it's free. So a lot of times these women, and money can be scarce, especially during COVID. People are losing jobs, income's not coming in like it used to. So park, it's a great place for children to socialize with other kids. And then I can bond with my son there if need be. And even so, I can have my own alone time while he bonds with other kids. So I get a little bit of me time where I can maybe bring a book or socialize with other adults. So it's not just me. And
you bring up a really interesting point on this, and I want to have you address it, and you too, Christy. And we all know this, just in general, raising kids, that if you don't take care of yourself, mentally and physically, you're not going to take care of your kids, especially the young kids that, maybe need some more help, right? Maybe when they're older, they can fend for themselves. So you brought up something really interesting, Christine, is that you got to take care of yourself. You got to find a way, that how I can do the best to keep myself mentally healthy and physically healthy. How do you do that?
Right. Well, and the reason why is because your kids look at you.
Exactly.
You're their number one role model.
Right.
What you do, they're going to do as well. So it's important to, as much as you can, as a single mom, be the best example,
Right.
even though it gets frustrating and I get frustrated. And you just have to, take a minute to just breathe, literally just sit and breathe and think this is a little child and you need to just be calm and patient. It's not always the easiest, but you just do it because
Right.
life happens and things happen that add to it that just life's stressful. So
Right. And then when you got foundations like what Christy started over here that you're
Yes.
obviously knee deep in and all that. And Christy, really, bless your heart for all the great work that you and of course Christine is doing and everybody else that you touch and all the tentacles on this. People know that they can come to you as some type of a haven in this very unhavenous world, if that's right, even a word in that aspect of it. What are the solutions to this? Are there solutions to this?
Yeah, there are solutions. It's, our number one objective in starting this foundation is awareness. Like I said, this is what people consider a family matter. And so a lot of it stays behind closed doors. So awareness and getting the education out there of that this is what's happening to your child when you do this. This is why it's important to model like Christine does for her son. So it starts at home, a lot of the solutions. Now, there's other solutions out there. You can outreach to counseling. You can figure out ways to deal with a relationship you're in. There's tools out there. In fact, later on in our series, we have an author and psychotherapist who will introduce a tool that she's actually written for the women. So it's really about empowering women and letting them know there's resources out there, whichever way they want to go, or if they choose to stay in the relationship, which a lot of them tend to go back. I think statistically they go back 7 times before they actually leave for good, to gain those tools to deal with it. And when it does happen in the home, have techniques. Remove your child out of the home. Take a car ride. There's many different resources and ways we can address this, but it's getting that awareness out there.
Right. Again, shout out the website one more time.
It's the Thumbprint Project.
Yeah, you really can't talk about that enough. And, Christina, I know you'll agree to this. Communication is the key. I happen to be in a field that likes to communicate, but, you have to do that. You have to talk about it. It doesn't go away the next day. It's there. Unfortunately, in some families, 724 and 365 in that, aspect with that. What's the best advice, again, you can give to people in this world, in this space?
That are dealing with domestic violence is leave. Do it. It doesn't get easier. It gets worse. It never gets better. And there are people in places, like I said, waiting. We're waiting for you. We're waiting to help you and your little ones, because you shouldn't have to go through this. Your little ones should not have to go through this. And break the cycle. Let's break it. It doesn't need to continue with them.
Yeah. And, you bring up an interesting word. It's the cycle. Because when you look at this, those folks that are abusive, and I know there are cases that there are women abusive to men, but we know the overwhelming majority is the other way.
Yes.
So I don't want to discount that at all. And that is that because they were abused as kids, and then probably their parents were abused, and probably the grandparents were abused, and all that down the road. And it's hard to break that cycle without question on this. But let me ask you this, Christy: do you work with families? Do you work with families that actually want to break the cycle? So here's a group that one of the parents recognizes, I need to stop this abuse. What is wrong with me? Do they work with you on that, or do you point them in a direction so that they can get some help?
So I serve on the advisory board for the Door of Hope, which is part of Salvation Army. And so I'm kind of on the outside of that, but certainly I have had interaction with some of the victims and understand their viewpoint. I want to talk a little bit more about the generational aspect of this, because it is generational. For me, in my life experience, I grew up asking, why me? And a lot of kids in these positions do, and they have a self-blame. Until you get help, you don't realize it's not your fault. And they tend to blame other people, other things on why they had this experience. And the answer, through maturity, you find it through maturity, right? And so I look back, and now after I have my own son, I look, and the question then is why? How? From why to how? Like, I'm holding my son, and I could never, ever do this to my own son. So it shifts, but it is generational. And unless you get help and you know what's happening, you have the opportunity to break that cycle and not carry it forward. And for some, it happens early on, and for some, it happens later in their life.
Yeah. Getting back to this, we talked about this earlier, Christine. As a single mom, you wear every single hat in the world times 40 on this, and now with
she does a great job.
Yeah, well, that's quite evident. But one of them is now you're a school teacher because of COVID. So let's add that to the list in all this, and I better know new math, because this doesn't look like the math I was doing when I was, my son's age on that. How do you deal with that too?
Oh my goodness, Google. Google. Or individuals like your daughter who can come in and tutor and help and do that pod. And, you join as a community during this time. And hopefully one of the parents maybe knows how to do the math, or is good at teaching reading, or whatever it may be. And you try and work as a community. And for those who don't have the community, they can go somewhere like Door of Hope, where that community is established and waiting for them. So they'll be able to get that there for their children.
Yeah. And that's just one more stressor, when we talk about this. And I think, Christy, we might have brought this up in a previous interview. San Diego isn't the most affordable place to live.
Right.
We know that a lot of this, no excuse for it, but a lot of it is caused by the financial strain on the family. And now with COVID on top of it, listen, I was barely making it paycheck to paycheck. And now, how am I going to do this? That just, again, exasperates the situation, in that vein. And again, coming to your foundation to get all those types of help is beyond critical.
Yeah, it is. And talking about a community, it takes a tribe to raise children, right? And to transition these women. So our foundation focuses on the children. So any money or any donations that we get, it goes towards one of our objectives this year is getting a full-time psychotherapist with EMDR training on board. But, there is that element that you want to provide resources to the women as well. So my foundation is just lucky and blessed to have partners like Cal Coast Credit Union, who is able to provide financial literacy to women. Some of these women, a part of the abuse that we were talking about is the financial abuse. They've never balanced a checkbook. They don't know how to look at their finances and manage them. Another thing that we have found through talking with the victims is, simple things as having a car. Because when they fled maybe sometimes in the middle of the night, they don't even have cars. So we've brought in New Cars Inc. Kevin Watkins has joined us, and we will find those victims reliable, affordable cars that don't break down a week later. And we find that these women are kind of coerced into buying these hunks of junk, so to speak, and then it's left on the Dorhof campus thinking it doesn't even run anymore. So that's an important element for them to get to work, but also to get their kids to school. And what I find alarming is that kids are taking mass transit system, sometimes by themselves. That sets up a whole new...
At a young age.
And think of the time that you spend on a bus that could be family time at home or doing homework. So it's we try to fill those holes, unmet needs for the victims and transition the women. But I do want to say we focus directly on the children, and we want to get those children refocused, re-thumbprinted, so to speak.
All right, we are chatting with Kristie Bruce Lane. She is the founder and president of the Thumbprint Project Foundation, joined by Secretary Christina Stacey, single mom that is doing it all, super mom, so to speak, in this aspect of it. So, Christine, let me ask you this. So, we always talked about advice you give to people and all this. You started, you were familiar with the foundation for a while, but you started as a secretary a couple months ago or so. What would you say is something that really surprised you learned about this foundation that you might not have knew before coming into this?
Well, I've been fortunate enough to not really be in the thick of domestic violence.
Right.
So just getting introduced to this world, because I was a single mom, but you live in a sort of bubble in certain communities where you're not really exposed to it. It's not really on the forefront. And so being introduced to this issue really just opened my eyes, and just hearing these women's stories and how they were able to overcome their fears of what do I do? Hopelessness, honestly, it's pure hopelessness that they have, and being able to overcome that. And it's just so inspiring to me as a woman who does have help. I think I have no excuse. These women are doing it with pure hopelessness, and I have hope. So when I lean and think about their stories, and that really does give me strength as a single mom to just overcome anything that I may personally struggle with. So just being a part of this foundation is absolutely eye-opening, and just to be able to help these women in any way I can, because I am blessed with help, is just an incredible opportunity.
Yeah. And I do want to tag on what Christine was saying. When we speak of homelessness, what we try to bring is the connection of the dots in the community, right? So a lot of people say, oh, my family is not a part, we don't have generational domestic violence, and so on and so forth. So they kind of just turn their head the other way. But the connection is, when you drive through San Diego and you see a homeless person, don't you ever think, what happened to that person? What happened in their life to make them take this path? And for us, in working with the children, we already know the point of impact. And so we're a very aggressive and progressive organization where we want to address it young so it doesn't repeat itself. As you know, if somebody has been exposed to homelessness in their life young, they tend to repeat it when they're older. And I do want to point out a few statistics here that children who grow up with domestic violence, the way it impacts them is they're 6 times more likely to commit suicide, 50 times more likely to be addicted to drugs or alcohol, which you see addiction on the streets now, 74 times more prone to commit violent crimes, and 90% of prisoners come from domestic violence. So when you think of it on that level, you start to connect the dots to our homeless crisis in San Diego, and you start to see the importance of getting to it early, getting as close to point of impact as you can, because when you become an adult on the streets, it's very hard to correct that. And they've been through so much trauma at that point. How do you unravel that?
All right. I'm Drew Schlossberg of Cloudcast Media, and you've been listening to the Thumbprint Project Foundation's docuseries, Childhood Domestic Violence, the Hidden Public Crisis. Christine, any final comments?
Just know, women, that there is hope, and we are waiting for you to help you, and that you're not alone, because we're here to assist in any way that we can for you and your children. Save your children. Let's stop the cycle now. Let's give them a chance, because they're worth it.
No, absolutely. Christy, how about you?
Yeah. So what I would like for everybody out there to know, and especially the women, there are resources. Please reach out. We get a bunch of Facebook messages and calls. Where do I go? And I'll guide them to the right place. But we do want the children suffering out there is to know that we see you and you matter, and this is not your fault. And that's the most important thing that we want to get across. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And let's shout out that website one more time.
Yeah, so www.thethumbprintprojectfoundation.com.
Very good. Kristie Bruce Lane, always good to see your smiling face, founder and president of the Thumbprint Project Foundation. And Christine, what an honor meeting you and hearing your story and all the great, valuable insights you have. I will guarantee you we'll get you back on the radio sooner than later. How's that sound?
Wonderful.
Very,
Absolutely
very good.
Wonderful.
I'm Drew Schlossberg of Cloudcast Media, and you've been listening to the docuseries Childhood Domestic Violence, The Hidden Public Crisis, brought to you by the Thumbprint Project.